enthusiasm. So first we will get started, as we always do, with a short meditation. So please relax and close your eyes. And take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And if thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them pass. Like watching a car move past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. All you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema. And on the exhale, listen. Shema, listen. And Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Today, to open our discussion, we're going to return to one of our assumptions, which we haven't looked at in quite a while. And that's this idea that we are driven by the conflict between the evil inclination and the good inclination. Now, these are phrases translated from Hebrew, and when we hear evil in English, we think of, pretty, awful stuff and murder and, this sort of thing. And really, it's much more, the nuance of the Hebrew is very different. It's kind of our selfish drives. It can be our anger, our sexuality, our selfishness. And the good inclination, that is much more in line with those parts of the prefrontal cortex that are involved in empathy and cooperation and community. And these, you can think of it as like in the movies with the devil on one shoulder, the angel on another shoulder, and that we sometimes get pushed in different directions. And that's when we need to make choices. So I thought maybe we could open our discussion here and see how you relate to this, or do you relate to this idea? Yeah, Paul.
I still do a translation in my head every time I see evil. So it is like I don't see it and think immediately of the separation from my higher power or whatever it might be, or being more self-centered than not. I have to do some translation. So it's not a big struggle. Just now that I know what it is, I just know, okay, so what we're really talking about in my mind is, and then I do that. That's all there is. Thanks.
Right. And so in your mind, what do you translate it to, or what is it kind of related?
So again, but for evil, for me, coming from, I mean, my family was not religious per se, but I was exposed to a lot of shaming as a kid. So for me, evil is just bad, just plain old bad, shame-filled kind of stuff. If I'm being evil, then it's all about, I mean, it's like yes, it's all about me, but it carries a weight of my history, my own history. So I need to be able step back from that particular word. And if it's to be either very narrowly focused on just who I am, and I know that when I am narrowly focused just on who I am and what's happening to me, that I lose track of other things that are going on, and that is not I wouldn't call it evil, but I would say that it is not beneficial for myself or for anybody else.
Mhm.
So
Yes, and I would agree, that's definitely not evil. And thank you so much for sharing that and for bringing, this concept of shame into the discussion, because some of us find it really hard to tolerate our own mistakes and our own weaknesses. And that's hard. Janos.
Well, when we talk about this, since I don't understand necessarily the whole Jewish philosophy, but I'm a big reader, I go by Carl Gustav Jung, who talked about our shadows. I see evil as my shadow. So if I really want to know how good I could become, I need to first see how bad I could become, because these are things on one continuum, how we apply ourselves. So if I'm not aware of my evilness or this negative side, the selfish, like all of that, then I cannot perform on this another end on a good side. So I just look at this continuum.
Thank you. Yeah, I have never studied Jung, but every time I hear like some Jungian teaching, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. That makes a lot of sense. There's also a teaching in the Talmud that at one point the rabbis like trapped the evil inclination, and they were very excited. We've conquered evil, but then like nobody went to work, and the chickens stopped laying eggs, and nobody repaired their roof. And there was this realization that this was an essential part of who we are, very much along the lines of what Janos was saying. It's not like we can just put this stuff away, but we can guide it, we can channel it. I mean, that's where like a lot of ambition is not a bad thing. Ambition is a bad thing if it's the only thing. If it drives every decision is driven by ambition, that's where we get into trouble. But the ambition, wanting to do better, that's okay. Karen.
I've read that there are multiple names, other ways of describing the evil inclination. And one of them that I've come to embrace is the word obstacle. That maybe for me more often, the evil inclination is the obstacle that gets in the way of my doing what I would rather do, what I think is the right thing to do, using the right thing as relevant. And it ties into something else that I was reading the other day about enthusiasm, which says that that is what moves us from I wish to do something to I will do something. And so if I think of enthusiasm as moving from I wish to I will, and an evil inclination as the obstacle that is somewhere on that spectrum between I wish and I will, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I think ties into what you're talking about.
Yeah, that makes a huge amount of sense, Karen. And actually, you're anticipating one of the quotes we're going to take a look at a little bit later, because what is it? What is it for me that holds me back from going from I wish to I will? Is it a rationalization? Is it fear? Is it priorities? Is it who knows what? It could be all kinds of things. So that's a great framing. Thank you. Anyone else care to comment? See, we have Janet and Marjorie, and Lillian has joined us. Hi, welcome. And Marianne, hello. Joanne.
Yeah, I don't know who originally said this, but a group therapist I had a long time ago said, feel the fear, but do it anyway. So that was that mantra, and that was a useful thing for me, because I'm shy and I'm fearful of doing certain things. And of course, the older I get, the less I care about that at all. But it helps to think that.
That's a really helpful framing also in the concept of enthusiasm or alacrity. It's like, you know what, sometimes you just got to do it. You know, fear, no fear, you know, sometimes we got to move forward. Roxanne.
Yeah, I largely agree that I found it's necessary to not use the word evil, because there is that very distinct interpretation of that word in English. But I also feel like it's maybe good to be cautious about saying the good inclination, because that's also a very inflexible word in English.
Mm.
And it kind of reminds me of these concept of like toxic positivity, like trying to get people to just ignore the things that are going wrong and be positive in every instance, and just kind of being mindful that too much of anything is not good for us. Too much of the base instinctive inclination is not good for us, but too much of this trying to be over intellectual about everything, live in your head and be super positive about everything all the time, or being, for example, like generosity is usually a good trait, but if you're generous to the point where like you can't take care of yourself, that's a problem.
Well said. Yeah, right on. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Paul.
So I'm glad that Janos brought up the Jungian part, because I know that years ago I was doing a lot more reading about Jungian ideas, and there was a book that was called Meeting the Shadow that was like such an eye-opener for me. And the main thing that it brought me to become aware of is that I don't always know where my dark side might come out. And I said, you know, so I think rather than evil, be sort of the dark side of myself, I think. The part that I try and shove away because I'm feeling shameful about it, feeling ashamed. And so I want to stuff it, but it has value. But the shadow part is where I can be walking along, and metaphorically, it's as if I'm not aware that that's there, then it's like I can trip over something coming from within, as if I were walking on a sidewalk and I trip on an uneven spot because I wasn't really paying attention. So it was really a very helpful analogy that did get me away from the whole good evil thing that was very difficult for me to conceptualize without personalizing it. And this was much easier for me to really understand. So thanks, Janos.
Sarah.
So this is kind of similar to what Joanne said about fear. I have this this saying that I learned in a coaching program I did, and that is that the obstacle is the way. The obstacle is the way. So, you know, to go towards the opposite, you know, it's sort of like feel the fear, but do it anyway, or do what scares you the most kind of philosophy. I kind of think that a lot of times the things that scare me the most are the things that I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's exactly relevant, but that's what came to my mind.
Yeah, thank you. And I think these are all sort of good flavors of understanding, you know, this conflict and the ability to kind of rein that in. You know, it can be scary at the top of the ski slope, but once you start going down, it's really energizing and exhilarating. So it's not like, and, you know, it can be kind of dangerous. So it's not surprising that we might feel some fear, you know, so it's, yeah, and we'll kind of get into this a little bit more as well. And let's do that right now. Let's go a little deeper. Okay, so you know what? Where was that? Oh, Yeah, so let's take a look at this kind of spectrum of enthusiasm. And as I mentioned last week, if I, ever come out with a second edition of the book, I'm going to rename this as Alacrity, again, because of all the baggage and the rah-rah around enthusiasm. It's really about taking action and taking action promptly. And so when we have too much alacrity, we can be very rash, we can get into sort of frantic busyness and always needing to be doing something, never time to think. And if we get to the other end of the spectrum, these words are slothful and lazy, or a little bit judgmental. I might want to do, but the idea is, just not taking action, finding, I forget who said it or what it was, the kind of would to will or should to will, never getting there, never pulling the trigger, never doing what it is that we could do. I also want to put this in conversation with the concepts we were talking about last week. The idea of stillness, focused mindful action. And it can be a resting and sitting in stillness, or we could actually bring stillness to an activity. Whereas doing nothing, is not being mindful about things. It's sort of time wasting. It's unfocused. Reading on the phone isn't doing nothing, but just doom scrolling and flipping around and constantly, jumping from thing to thing. That might be considered doing nothing. So Marianne, I see your hand.
Can you go back to the first slide, the one about with the arrow? Is it possible to bring that back up?
You bet.
Yeah, this addresses action or non-action is behavior, but I think you can also have enthusiasm in your mind, just in how you're thinking, because that's really where my issue is, more in my mind and not so much in my actions. I just wanted to say that.
Sure, and by in your mind, are you talking about sort of feeling unenthusiastic, like I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do it?
Like you do it anyway, but you have no enthusiasm or even negative thoughts about doing it. So, but you're still doing it. Yeah, so I think there's also a place not only for behavior, but for also what's going on in your thinking about it cognitively.
Yeah, and that's where it's easy to get pulled a little bit too much into the English word for enthusiasm, which has kind of a lot of these flavors of, well, do I want to be doing this or not? And in the Mussar sense, it is a little bit more on the side of, the taking action versus not taking action, specifically. But at the same time, we can take an action kind of dragging our feet and not really putting our energy into it and not putting our best into it. So it's not completely divorced from what you're talking about. That's a piece of the picture as well, as you point out. But it is at the same time very much about the action per se is a big chunk of this. Does that make sense?
I think so, maybe.
Yeah, so maybe try to substitute alacrity for enthusiasm. It's kind of being on it, sort of acting with crispness and promptness. So then we have, as I say, these other ideas about, it doesn't necessarily mean like big movement types of actions, but there's something about acting kind of with focus and with deliberation, as opposed to kind of not, being focused. And that can sort of go to either end of the spectrum too. Like if we're not focused, we could be just jumping into stuff,
Mhm.
or we could just be kind of sitting there and not doing anything because we can't sort of get it together. So you can almost think of like this focused stillness as being in the middle, and the doing nothing is because sometimes at work, are like scurrying around and everybody needs to show how busy they are, but actually nothing is getting accomplished. It's like it's actually not moving the needle and doing the important things. So all of this, well, I have like some stuff I'm leading up to, but before I get there, I wanted to pause and see if anyone has any comments or questions.
Mhm.
Okay, then I'm going to keep going. I'm either on a roll or have lost everybody completely. I'm not sure, but these were the two quotes that I wanted to put in conversation with each other. So may I have a volunteer to read the first one, please? And I can't see most of you, so feel free to just unmute and read.
A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man.
Great, thank you. All right, so we'll just stop at that one. So what is this? Is from Proverbs. A little sleep, a little slumber, and scarcity and poverty are going to be the result. So what is the message here? And we may agree or disagree with this message, but what is it saying?
To me, it sounds like it's saying don't rest, which is really ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you mean don't rest? A little sleep and suddenly I'm going to end up without any money and without a home? That seems a little extreme.
Good.
And I think that is a thread that goes through, like, read some of the medieval Mussar literature around this soul trait. They do really just go on and on about laziness and not resting and don't waste a minute. And, you always have to kind of have something going on. So, yeah. Did I see a hand there? Yes, Marjorie.
I interpret this not just in a monetary possession frame, but I think of it also as can't think of a word. If you don't show enthusiasm in every, like, relationships emotionally, I think that you will starve yourself. Like, you'll lose out in that respect. That's kind of how I interpret it. But you also have to I understand, like, the source of this is how many thousands of years ago, Proverbs, right? Talmudic
Before that.
phrase. So you have to kind of read into it a little bit. That's just how I interpreted it.
I really love that, bringing poverty to our relationships if we're just getting complacent with them, if we're not paying attention. Yeah. Thank you. Paul.
It's interesting that at first I was thinking that this could have been, there could have been some context missing, that maybe there was a community that was feeling a little bit more relaxed than the rabbi thought was appropriate at the time. But on the other hand, from what Marjorie just said, it just brought back to me the, this meeting my shadow. My shadow is going to be wanting to slow me down at different times. So I can rationalize all these things, a little sleep, a little slumber. I mean, what's the big deal? But if I'm rationalizing it, if I'm not being honest with myself, then that can cause problems. So, I don't think I don't see this as being a like a commandment kind of a thing, that you must never be still, or you must always be on. Just, I guess, as a reminder.
Thank you. And I've been thinking about, been percolating on the kind of historical context. I mean, the Book of Proverbs, it's in the Bible, which means it's over 2,000 years old. And the Bible was written by the Kingdom of Judea, and they were farmers, and they were subsistence farmers. And when the rains didn't come, people starved to death. So if you are a subsistence farmer, you know, for those Midwesterners out you are not taking a day off. The chickens need, you know, the eggs need, the cows need to be milked. You know, so if we kind of remember the author of this was a farmer who was on the edge of starvation, yeah. And today it's in what's called the wisdom literature. So, and we can, and there is wisdom in it, and there's ways that the wisdom could be misinterpreted. So, Joanne and then Ron.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with Marjorie, and I like what she said very much about the emotional poverty and how people avoid things by napping or resting, or, you know, don't do what they're supposed to do, but also just in life, people have other ways of avoiding work, like Maynard G. Krebs from year one. And, you know, but it's like, but you have to. And then we have a day of rest set aside and a day of a nice afternoon nap set aside. And we can't do that every day because life's not going to work. Something else. No, except that I was reading about, you know, people who live in the rural areas and are farmers. But I believe this was written by King Solomon, who probably did not live a pastoral life, but David actually was a shepherd. So I was also thinking about Moses, who was a leader until he was 180 years old, and then he died. And no retirement. And somebody else said, I'll retire when God retires me. All right. Okay.
Thank you, Joanne. Ron.
I was just going to say, in reference to the proverb that we're reading, laziness breeds more laziness. Excuses breed more excuses. This goes back to the idea of the evil inclination. Once you start making excuses, and once you get into this lazy mode, it's your Yetzer Hara trying to get you not to take action, and it multiplies. You start out with a little bit, and then all of a sudden you need more, and you need more. There's a great story about a man who a rabbi comes to town, and he won't go to see the rabbi because there's a lion in the street. And then they tell him there's no lion in the street. And ultimately, they go through the man comes up with every excuse under the sun not to leave his house. And that's what that proverb is relating to. Laziness breeds more laziness, and excuses breed more excuses.
Thank you, Ron. Yes, and the Yetzer Hara, that's the Hebrew word for that I chose to translate as the evil inclination. So yeah, and sometimes when we're talking about the Yetzer or the Yetzer Hara, it does become a little bit easier because then we have to translate from the Hebrew, but we don't need to translate from the English meaning that, you know, is ascribed to it. Okay, so I've put that quote in conversation with a quote from a book that I'm reading for school, and maybe I have someone, perhaps someone we haven't heard from, but it doesn't have to be. I'll read this second one.
I'll read it.
Thank you.
As a new therapist in training, I was puzzled about why I kept feeling remarkably sleepy during my sessions with one particular client. I was getting plenty of sleep and I didn't think I was bored. My supervisor taught me to recognize my fatigue and yawning as a sign of tension, not tiredness. Neurologically, our hindbrain stores physical memories and responds when we are under threat, be it physical, mental, to integrity, or a memory. Karen McClintock, Trauma-Informed Pastoral Care.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share and I will put that into the chat. And the reason why one of the reasons why I wanted to share this quote is I am taking this class on trauma-informed pastoral care. And I was reading this last week, and dogs yawn when they're stressed too, absolutely. And last Friday night, I was just exhausted, and it was like 7:30 and I could barely keep my eyes awake. And I was like, what is going on? And I realized that I'm seeing these clients and for short-term grief counseling, and it's for 8 sessions. And so I had my 8th session for the first time with one of the clients. And so I had ended with this client that day. And, it was all built up, but I realized that I just was taking it hard. It was just, I was feeling a little bit of pain from the separation. And then when I started looking into it, it's like, oh, and I started getting these thoughts, maybe I should have said this, and are they going to be okay? And this and that. And so all of that kind of, and I'm okay, and nobody needs to kind of take care of me or anything, but I just want to share how interesting it is that I had just read this. I'm like, oh, this is a tension thing. This is like a stress thing of kind of that situation. And so in that context, it's the last thing we want to do is just sort of push ahead and keep going. We need to understand what it is what's our body telling us, and how can I sort of rest and honor kind of this experience that I'm having. So I kind of jumped to my punchline kind of right away before letting other people jump in, but Paul.
Yeah, along those lines, I'm reminded that last Sunday, I was taking my mom over to visit her house for the last time before we were going to say, okay, we're saying goodbye to the house. We're picking up everything, whatever we leave here is going to be sold or given away, whatever it is. So, and I was really, really tired all morning long. And I just thought, God, what is going on? I had coffee of everything. I mean, I'm just not able to. And then after we left, we were there for a couple hours after you left. And then, she didn't know whether she'd start weeping or whether she'd be just fine or something. And I realized once she said she was just fine and, ready to go back to her new home, like it all lifted from me. And that's when I realized, oh man, that's what it was. I wasn't tired. I was just holding everything together. And that caused me to feel that sense of tiredness. So very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And the hindbrain is this comes from the hindbrain, I think she said, and the hindbrain is one of the areas that gets associated with the evil inclination. So you could also say that it is a protective mechanism. It is the most primitive part of the brain. And, fight or flight has become fight, flight, or freeze. And even some people call it fight, flight, freeze, or fainting. Where the hindbrain just shuts it down, boom, I am out. And so I think that's kind of the reflex that can kind of come into play sometimes, and learning how to recognize that and honor that and not feel embarrassed about it, but to take it seriously and see where we can go with it. Anyone else have any thoughts? Stephanie, you look like you're percolating, but you don't need to share if you don't want to.
I just find it interesting and just listening.
Okay.
Learning.
I'll have Sarah and then Roxanne.
I was going to say that when you're in shock, you kind of shut down, and it's a protective mechanism, like you said. And I think there's also we have defense mechanisms that protect us.
Mhm.
So, you know, if you've grown up in a family that wasn't so healthy or whatever, as a kid, you learn how to survive and you shut down. You know, if people say, oh, that's not true, or that's not right, you know, you shut down and you think, okay, you know, so you internalize that. So I think that defense mechanisms come into play here for me as well, you know, when we're under threat, be it physical, mental, or a memory.
Yeah.
We, you know, and when you're a kid, you don't have a choice, but when you're an adult, well, even when you're an adult, shock,
Yeah.
you know, you can shut down just as a protective device. And you sort of slowly, you know, like say with PTSD, you know, you slowly can look at painful things. And, you know, you can't like pull the covers off all at once, or it's just, you know, too much.
Mhm. Thank you, Sarah. That makes a lot of sense. Roxanne.
I was just thinking in addition to the mental impacts of trauma and tension, is there's also kind of a physiological aspect to it, in that when we're really tense, we sometimes will start to breathe more shallowly. So that tiredness is not just our mind, it's we're literally feeling drowsy because we're not getting enough oxygen.
Mhm.
And yawning is like an autonomic response to try to get more air in us. And I was going to say, I'd also heard like 4 F's, but the ones that I heard were fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Like the 4th one was like
Ah,
trying to placate whoever is
mhm.
aggressing you.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely more than 2. And yeah, so thank you for sharing that, you know, and it is absolutely like a physiological thing. You know, I had another thing that's come up with a couple of my grief clients where it's like, why can't I do this? You know, why can't I go for a walk around the block? I would feel better. It would get me some exercise. It would help me lose weight, but I just can't seem to. And this was being internalized as like laziness. I just can't, you know, do this. And when we talked about it, the issue was, you know, he was grieving his wife. And when she had cancer, the only thing she could do was walk around the block. So they would go walk around the block. And so this wasn't an issue of laziness. This was an issue of trauma. You know, there was a lot of meaning that came with that. And so having that kind of discussion, it's like, oh, okay, I can, you know, when I'm ready, I'll take a walk. But if it's just kind of buried, you know, or we're noticing I can't do this, you know, there might be a meaning there, you know, that we aren't ascribing it to. And so, you know, again, it's not only about taking the action, it's about understanding, well, why am I not taking the action? And it doesn't mean something's wrong with me necessarily. Yes, Marjorie.
Well, it's so funny that we're discussing this right now, because this afternoon I just came. So a couple weeks ago, I was at a wedding in New York, and on the way at the gate going to the waiting for the airplane, I tripped and fell. And I mean, it hurt. Okay. So I stayed home from work because in retail, I stand a lot. And this afternoon, you know, I just haven't been motivated to do much. And I just finally came to the realization this afternoon, like, I'm emotionally exhausted. Like, nursing this foot has just drained me. And, you know, I can do things. I finally said, you better get out and like take the trash out. You know, you've got to start walking. But it is very, you know, there are circumstances in our lives where you just get emotionally exhausted. But it's so funny that we're talking about this, because I absolutely thought about that today. Why am I so tired? And it's like, yeah, because you've had it. So I'm getting there. I'm almost, tomorrow it'll be 2 weeks, and I think I'm good. I'm ready for that marathon now.
Ready for the
Or
marathon.
ice
Good.
skating. I think it'd be more ice skating in these parts. Okay.
Well, it's example like number 1 million of like the sultrate you need is the one that shows up, when you need it. We're gonna get ready and head into our breakout groups. And let's see. So this is kind of what we were talking about. I think I told Karen that we were going to kind of get to a point that she had made. I'm just going to copy it and put this in the chat. So could someone please volunteer to read this quote?
I wouldn't mind reading it, but I don't know what that word is.
Alacrity?
Thank you. Yes. Let me open that back up again. Okay. Those with alacrity act promptly to do good. For in the same way that the evil inclination works to lure people into the net of wrongdoing, it also attempts to prevent them from doing good. Adapted from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, The Path of the Just.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So here's the question. This evil inclination that we've been talking about, the Yetzer Hara, sometimes it can lure us to do the wrong thing. Sometimes it can prevent us from doing good. And so, what is preventing you from doing good? And maybe what is one blockage to doing good in the coming week that you would like to overcome? Or maybe, kind of to Marjorie's point, maybe it's okay not to overcome it right now. It's, what, I'm exhausted from nursing my foot and I just need to wait until we're ready to kind of start, the marathon training again. So here we go. Your breakout rooms are open. Hey everyone, welcome back. Sorry we're a little squeezed for time today, but we have time to hear from a couple of you. Would anyone care to share maybe some way you're being held back from doing good, or how you might want to address that this week, or other insights from your discussions?
Okay.
Yes.
Something that came up for us was what is good, and we all have our own interpretation of what exactly is doing good. So for some, they never have an issue with it. Or like, is it dealing with a friend? Is it dealing with, we all have our own interpretation of what doing good is. That was kind of a topic.
Good topic. Thank you. I will say the original quote said doing the mitzvot, and I thought that was a little bit too narrow and wouldn't necessarily apply. So I editorialized that to doing good. Joanne.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was talking about is how my evil inclination keeps me from doing the things that I consider making progress on, some of my issues, like keeping things tidy and, I had neat and clean one year, but that's like for over a year now. But I have made progress. So, but I still feel the pull of doing stupid games and wasting time. And I get mad at myself for that.
Well, congratulations on making progress.
Yeah.
We seek progress, not perfection. So thank you. We're going to speed round this one a little bit. So we'll go for Paul and then Marianne.
Yeah, I think for me, like my life was always trying to please people, and that meant I had to figure out what would make them pleased by whatever I did, which meant it would take me forever to come up with something because I had to make sure it was an ironclad kind of a thing to do. And if nothing else, my 12-step program has really helped me understand that I have no control over that. All I know is what I can do. And it's been, in that way, it's been much easier for me to simply do something. And that just do it is a little bit easier for me to do these days than it used to be. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Mary Ann. And then Kaya will have the last.
I think that sometimes, well, my personal problem is that I feel responsible for global warming, solving that, for eradicating poverty, for helping everybody who isn't. So to me, and I've been told that, you know, what I'm doing is enough. So the whole idea of having obstacles, I think that's, for me, that's personally the wrong question. The good question is, how can you accept that you are doing enough to help the world and other people?
I think that is a really, really important question. And I would say that one way that the evil inclination, like, where's that voice coming from that's saying you're not doing enough? And who told you that you're personally responsible for global warming? We could say that's the inclination that's saying, well, Marianne, no, how can you think you're doing enough? Because it's still getting warmer. So, you know, so congratulations on reining that in and working. And it's not like we're ever done. That's why we, you know, sometimes people call me, it's doing our own work, you know, our own spiritual curriculum. Kaya.
I guess I would like to take away the word evil. I mean, for me to say, you know, I like to focus on what is the best that I'm doing today to do the best that I can. You know, if it's limited one day, or it's these great big things like I'm going and doing some volunteer work another day, I'm resting because I need to, whatever it might be, I'm doing the best I can today. And the word evil is not a helpful word to me. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know you have something else which, you know, brings you to us late. And we actually, many here are in agreement with you. We had talked about that quite a bit earlier. So you are right in line with the spirit of the community. All right, friends. Well, it's with some regret that we need to end today. So we'll end as we began with a short meditation. So please relax and close your eyes. And take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And a nice leisurely exhale. Maybe we can experience just a moment of letting go. Letting go of those expectations we need to be perfect. Letting go of those expectations that it all depends on us. Letting go of those self-judgments when we are not as on it as we'd like to be. And to just sit in the glow of that divine spark, which is that light that's filtering through our eyelids. You feel that warmth and love and acceptance that we are okay, that we are enough. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes.